Good morning. I declare the meeting open and welcome everyone here today, including those joining us in the gallery and also on the live stream. Could everyone please stand as I ask Councillor Law to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet.
So good morning, Madam Mayor, and through you, the Sunshine Coast Council acknowledges the Kabi Kabi and Yinnaburra people of the Sunshine Coast, whose lands and waters we meet on today. The traditional owners' unique values, ancient and enduring cultures deepen and enrich our lives today. The Sunshine Coast has been a place of connection, celebration and kinship for thousands of years, and we commit to working together in partnership with the traditional owners to support self-determination through economic and community development. Truth-telling is a significant part of our journey, and legacy issues resulting from colonisation are still experienced by the traditional owners and First Nations people. Now, more than ever, we commit to better understanding of a collective history of the Sunshine Coast traditional owners and the experiences of all First Nations people. We recognise our shared history and will continue to work in partnership to provide a foundation for building a shared future with all Kabi Kabi and Yinnaburra people. We pay our respect to the traditional owners of the Sunshine Coast and to their elders, past and present. We acknowledge the important role First Nations people continue to play within the Sunshine Coast community. Together, we are all stronger.
Would the chamber remain standing as I invite Venerable Lagsam from the Chenrezig Institute to provide a blessing.
So good morning, is that right? That's okay. Yes, so my name's Larsam, and thank you for inviting me again. This first meeting of a new council. So at the time of the Buddha, India was divided into kingdoms. Now, kingdoms were not, there were many, many kingdoms in what's India now. And it was an inherited title. So there's they were sort of rulers of everything, the kings within their area, which is probably more power than you have as a councillor, but probably less people. But anyway, so the verses I'm going to read are from a sutra called the Sutra of Golden Light, and these are some verses that a king who was stepping aside from being the king was giving advice to his son, who was newly the king, and so I thought it might apply to this new council. So it's quite a long chapter, so I'm not going to read it all. So those who commit misdeeds must be tamed according to the crime. In the realm where the king is lawful, he must in a realm protected in keeping with the Dharma, the king must not commit unlawful deeds. I'll explain the royal treatise, which benefits all beings, cuts through misgiving and extinguishes every misdeed. Human kings are created in order to bring misconduct to an end, thwart what's against the Dharma, which is the Buddha's teachings, and set beings in virtuous deeds so they may ascend to heavenly abodes. When a king overlooks the presence of evildoers in his realm, terrible clandestine acts will ruin and destroy that land. When a king does not perform the function for which kingship had been bestowed, he demolishes his own realm as an elephant lord destroys a lotus pond. When a king is partisan, ignoring those who commit misdeeds, misfortunes such as these in their regions will come to be. When his lands are ravaged by rampant disorderly acts, he should quell these transgressions and encourage positive deeds. Thus have the lords of gods vested kingship upon him in the human realm. Giving up even his life for the sake of justice, he should never succumb to bias. Should even once the king take the side of people related and unrelated, or any person in his realm, he will utterly fall into prejudice. Fame and renown of a king who's virtuous in Dharma fills the triple worlds and makes the lords of gods happy in the heaven of the 33. Those gods will say our son in Jamdabifa is such an honest king, establishing beings in virtuous deeds. Through such good deeds, this king helps beings arrive in our heavens. Protecting his realm according to the Dharma, teaching well the laws of Dharma too, those engaged in virtue should be encouraged, and the king himself must refrain from evil deeds. When those who do evil deeds are accordingly tamed, a year of abundance will ensure. Magnanimous will be the king, possessed of renown and fame, who reigns his subjects in peace. So I wish you all a peaceful reign. I hope that you all enjoy your first meeting, and thank you very much again for asking me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Venerable Lagsam. Councillors, tomorrow is Anzac Day, when we mark the anniversary of Australian and New Zealand soldiers landing on the Gallipoli Peninsula in 1915, as well as commemorating all Australians who've served in military operations. I ask now that we pause for a minute of silence as a sign of respect and reflection for all those who have served to protect our way of life and for the betterment of humanity across the world. Councillor Hungerford will recite the Ode of Remembrance at the conclusion of the minute's silence. Councillor Hungerford.
It gives me great pleasure to recite the ode. They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end, against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. I ask everyone to please remain standing as the CEO addresses the meeting.
Good morning, Madam Mayor and councillors. I wish to take the opportunity to share some very sad news about the passing of council employee Cherie Morrison on the 5th of March and share with you in this remembrance her legacy. Cherie's partner Fergus and her two children Tom and Ruby are here, as well her very good friend Tess, to be with us in the chamber. We welcome all four of you to the chambers today. Cherie was a truly engaging and inspiring person who contributed so much to our Sunshine Coast Council and all of our community. She commenced with Council in 2018 as a project and policy officer and has been an integral contributor to several of Council's key strategic plans and policies, including the development of our corporate plan. Cherie was an active member of our community. She was a committee member of the Majimba Surf Club, and she volunteered for many sporting organisations to support her family and their active lifestyles. She was an ambassador for the Breast Cancer Network, Australia's metastatic lived experience group, where she contributed to published articles and gave inspiration and support to others. Cherie played an important part within our council team and was a much loved team member. We will remember an incredibly inspirational, caring and fun colleague who had a deeply curious mind and always dedicated herself to her work, our community, and of course to her family. She will be greatly missed by council. Thank you, councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Please be seated. Moving to item 3, all councillors are in attendance here this morning, so on to item 4. Councillors, can I please have someone to move receipt and confirmation of the minutes of both the ordinary meeting of 7 March 2024 and the minutes of the post-election meeting of 11 April 2024. Councillor Johnston moved. Councillor Natoli seconded. All those in favour? The motion is carried unanimously. There is no mayoral minute this morning, so moving to item 6. Councillors, I remind you of the requirements of the Local Government Act of 2009, which sets out how councillors' conflicts of interest are managed and local government matters. These requirements apply to how we deal with such matters at this meeting. Should you have a conflict of interest in relation to an agenda item, please raise it at the commencement of that item. Councillor Bunnag, I understand you wish to inform Council of some conflicts of interest that do not specifically relate to items on today's agenda.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, under section 150EL subsection 3B of the Local Government Act 2009, I notify that I have a prescribed conflict of interest in the development application reference number MCU 22/0111 in relation to an impact assessable development proposed at lot 904 Sunrise Drive, Maroochydore. This development application is for 128 multiple dwelling units. I am unaware whether this application will be brought before Council for determination or whether it will be decided by Council officers under delegation. The prescribed conflict of interest arises due to the fact that on 19th of February 2024, I made a written submission to Council objecting to this development application before the application has been decided. These circumstances provide the basis for a prescribed conflict of interest as defined in section 150EI subsection C2 of the Act. In accordance with section 150EK of the Local Government Act, I exclude myself from any meeting, discussion or communication in relation to making a decision on this matter. Councillors, under section 15EL subsection 3B of the Local Government Act 2009, I notify that I have a prescribed conflict of interest in the development application reference number MCU 23/0344 in relation to a code assessable development application proposed at 22 Jubilee Esplanade, Point Arkwright. This development application is for 3 multiple dwelling units. The prescribed conflict of interest arises due to the fact that on the 25th of January 2024, I provided written comments to Council objecting to this development application before the application has been decided. These circumstances are considered to provide the basis for a prescribed conflict of interest as defined in section 150EI, C subsection 2 of the Act. While I acknowledge that as a code assessable development application, this matter may not be considered at an ordinary meeting of the Sunshine Coast Council, in accordance with section 15EK of the Local Government Act, I will exclude myself from any meeting, discussion or communication in relation to making a decision on this matter. Councillors, under Section 150EL, subsection 3B of the Local Government Act 2009, I notify that I have prescribed conflict of interest in the development application reference number MCU 23/0053 in relation to an impact accessible development proposed at Warren Road, Yurumba. This development application is for the extension to a tourism attraction, car museum and car park at the Palmer Coolum Resort, and may be considered at a future ordinary meeting of Council. The prescribed conflict of interest arises due to the fact that on 18th of December 2023, prior to having made an announcement of my intention to run for Council, I made a written submission to Council opposing this development application before the application has been decided. These circumstances provide the basis for a prescribed conflict of interest as defined in Section 150EL, subsection C2 of the Act. In accordance with Section 150EK of the Local Government Act 2009, I will exclude myself from any meeting, discussion or communication in relation to making a decision on this matter. Councillors, under Section 150EQ, subsection 3B of the Local Government Act 2009, I notify that I may have a declarable conflict of interest in the reconfiguration of a lot development application, reference number RAL 23/0085, and the operational works development application, reference number OPW 23/0416. Both in relation to development proposed at 55A Old Orchard Road Drive, Palmwoods. The declarable conflict of interest arises due to the fact that I have made public comments indicating my personal opposition to the proposed development at this location before the applications have been decided. As such, a reasonable person might form the view that I have a predetermined position on these applications and therefore A, could reasonably presume to have a conflict between my personal interests and the public interests, and B, because of the conflict, my participation in a decision about this application might lead to a conclusion that is contrary to the public interest. These circumstances are considered to provide the basis for a declarable conflict of interest as defined in Section 150EN of the Act. While I recognise that as a reconfiguration of a lot and operational works applications, these matters will not come before any ordinary meeting of Council for decision making, I've decided that I will not participate in any discussions relating to the making of a decision on these applications due to the existence of my declarable conflict of interest. Councillors, under Section 150EQ, subsection 3B of the Local Government Act 2009, I notify that I may have a declarable conflict of interest in the development application reference number MCU 23/0238 in relation to an impact accessible development proposed at 698 to 706 David Low Way and 11-13 Menzies Drive, Pacific Paradise. This development application is for residential apartment buildings, short-term accommodation and a food and drink outlet. I am unaware at this time whether this application will be brought before Council for determination or whether it will be decided by Council officers under delegation. Councillors, the declarable conflict of interest arises due to the fact that I have made public comments on this development application indicating my opposition to the proposed development before the application has been decided. As such, a reasonable person might form the view that I have a predetermined position on this development application and therefore, A, could reasonably be presumed to have a conflict between my personal interests and the public interest, and B, because of the conflict, my participation in a decision about this application might lead to a decision that is contrary to the public interest. These circumstances may be considered to provide the basis for a declarable conflict of interest as defined in Section 150EN of the Act. Councillors, I believe that I will be able to objectively contribute to the decision-making process in this application because my comments were reflective of community sentiment which was articulated in submissions and gathered by me during door-knocking and other forms of community consultation. Going forward, I will wait to review the officer's recommendation and all relating documentation to this development application before making a final decision as to how I will be voting on this particular application. On this basis, I have formed the view that I can appropriately manage any conflict of interest and that I can impartially participate in making a decision in the public interest on this matter. I now ask the eligible councillors to consider and determine whether or not I may participate in the making of a decision on this matter within the context of how that is defined in section 150EE of the Act.
Thank you, Councillor Bunnag. Councillors, in accordance with section 150ES of the Local Government Act 2009, I now call for someone to move that Councillor Bunnag either may or may not participate in discussions, deliberations and/or decisions relating to development application MCU 23/0238 for a proposed development at 698 to 706 David Low Way and 11 to 13 Menzies Drive, Pacific Paradise. Councillors, should someone move that Councillor Bunnag may participate, the motion will need to include reasons for this consideration. Councillor Suarez.
Through the chair, it is a difficult one, but I will decide to move that Councillor Bunnag may participate in discussions, deliberations and decisions regarding the development application. And the reason I give is the extensive local knowledge held as the divisional councillor. In addition to that, can I speak to it now or may I wait?
I'll just get a seconder. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Suarez.
The reason I've decided to vote or to put forward this motion in this way is because it was only 4 years ago that a number of us came to this chamber and made comments that were uninformed. And in my experience over the last few weeks with Councillor Bunnag, he has had some strong views about certain issues, and once he has been informed with all of the information by the council officers and previous councillors, he has pragmatically taken that information into account before making any other decisions. So that is the reason why I will put this forward as it is.
Are there any questions, councillors? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Johnston.
I'd just like to ask Councillor Bunnag, so you, did you put a submission in,
Councillor Bunnag.
firstly?
No, Councillor Johnston, I did not.
So how broadly did you advise the community that you're opposed to this development?
Councillor Bunnag.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. With respect to, I think it's two parts. In terms of community engagement, it's fair to say I door knocked somewhere between 300 and 400 houses in Pacific Paradise, and that informed my view in terms of, as I've said, with respect to the comments that I made. The comments that I made were then published on a Facebook post on the community chat for Pacific Paradise and on my own personal candidates page at the time.
So just one final question, I think.
Yes, Councillor Johnston.
Those comments, were they against the application or were you just reporting the community sentiment?
Councillor Johnston, consistent with my opening statement, it's fair to say that my comments at the time reflected that I was opposed to the application on the basis of community sentiment that I'd heard in my community engagement.
Councillor Johnston.
Just advise that on that basis I'll be voting against the motion.
Any other questions, speakers? Councillor Suarez, would you like to close?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. I completely understand Councillor Johnston's position on this, and while I believe Councillor Bunnag's comments were a mistake, it was a naive one. We've had a number of discussions with new councillors about the processes within council, requesting information from council officers, and I guess the language that we use when we're communicating out to the broader public. I think it's appropriate for Councillor Bunnag to remain a decision maker on this topic so that we have someone who can reflect the sentiment of the community of Division 8 in which this application resides. Being a neighbouring councillor, I'm not that close with the application, but I have heard similar sentiments to those that were expressed by Councillor Bunnag from the community of Division 8.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. Noting Councillor Bunnag is not eligible to vote, I'll now put the motion. Those in favour? Councillors Broderick, Landsberg, Burns, Natoli, Dixon, Suarez, Law and Mayor Natoli. Those against? Councillors Johnston and Hungerford. The motion is carried. Moving on to item 7. Councillors, noting we have no presentations from councillors this morning, we move now to item 8.1 and I invite the officers to make their presentations to council. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Mayor and councillors. I'm presenting to you today a report on a development application involving 3 aspects of development, which are a preliminary approval for a material change of use, including a variation request, a development permit for reconfiguring 1 lot into 2 lots, a development permit for a material change of use to establish a dwelling house and a secondary dwelling. The property is located at 38 to 40 Clitheroe Avenue, Buderim. The application is subject to impact assessment under the Sunshine Coast Planning Scheme. The application is before council for a decision because it involves a variation request. The site is located at the southern end of Clitheroe Avenue in Buderim. The site adjoins the Buderim Mountain State School to the south and residential properties to the northeast and to the west. The site is currently located in the limited development landscape residential zone in the planning scheme. The site currently includes 3 existing and lawfully established dwellings dating around the 1970s and the 1980s. The existing buildings are located towards the northeastern and the highest part of the site. The central and southern parts of the site include a network of concrete pathways in amongst landscape grounds. Martins Creek traverses the western part of the site and there is a small waterfall in the southwest. There is mature native vegetation located in the western part of the site. The site was included in the limited development zone when the planning scheme commenced due to the presence of multiple mapped overlays, including biodiversity, landslide hazard, steep land and flood hazard overlays. The proposed variation request seeks to make changes to the zoning and overlay mapping that apply to the site. If accepted, these changes would then facilitate the other aspects of development that the application seeks approval for, that is, the subdivision and the new dwelling house. The first variation sought is a change to the zoning of the subject site so that it is partly within the low-density residential zone, including precinct LDR1 protected housing, and partly within the limited development zone. The area of land proposed to be included in the low-density residential zone is approximately 3,000 square metres. The second variation sought is a change to the minimum lot size for the part of the site that would be zoned low-density residential from 700 square metres, which is the minimum nominated in the Buderim Local Plan Code, to 1,500 square metres. The purpose of this variation is to ensure that any future application for subdivision in the low-density residential zoned area, which includes lots that would be less than 1,500 square metres, would be subject to impact assessment. The third variation sought is a change to the biodiversity, waterways and wetlands overlay mapping applicable to the subject site. The application proposes that the extent of mapped native vegetation area be changed to reflect the results of detailed technical assessment and ground truthing. The ecological assessment report submitted with the application has determined that the native vegetation area should be confined to areas of remnant native vegetation located in the western part of the site. Vegetation in the remainder of the site mostly consists of non-native vegetation species, including camphor laurel and landscaped gardens. The application also proposes that the currently mapped waterway and riparian protection area be changed to coincide with the actual alignment of Martins Creek, which is located further west of its mapped location as observed in the field. The application also proposes that the stream order for Martins Creek be changed from a stream order 3 to 4 to a stream order 1 to 2 to reflect the correct classification of the waterway. Furthermore, the application also proposes to remove a mapped wetland over the southern half of the site because the vegetation and the site topography does not support the characteristics of a wetland community. The application seeks a development permit for reconfiguring the subject land into 2 lots. Proposed Lot 10 would be 1,542 square metres in area and would be wholly included in the low-density residential zone if the variation request is approved. Lot 10 would include the largest of the existing dwelling houses, as well as a garage and the existing driveway. Proposed Lot 9 would be 9,874 square metres in area and would be partly included in the low-density residential zone and partly included in the limited development zone if the variation request is approved. Proposed Lot 9 would include the other dwelling house and the small cottage. Lot 9 would also include the site's environmental attributes, including native vegetation and Martins Creek. The application seeks a development permit for a material change of use of premises to establish a new dwelling house and a secondary dwelling on proposed Lot 9. The application proposes to demolish the existing dwelling house located in the northern part of the site and replace it with a larger and new dwelling house with its own driveway access. The application also proposes to retain the existing small cottage on the site as a secondary dwelling. So the key assessment considerations for this application are the consistency of the proposed variations to the mapping with the Sunshine Coast Planning Scheme, the nature and extent of the development associated with the proposed subdivision and the new dwelling house, and whether the development would achieve the relevant planning scheme outcomes, and the effect of the proposed variations would have on submission rights for later applications. The assessment has found that the proposed zoning and overlay variations reflect ground truth site constraints and would be consistent with the planning scheme outcomes for the limited development zone and the biodiversity, waterways and wetlands overlay. The variations proposed are very limited in scope, and the balance of the planning scheme would continue to apply to any future development on the site. The proposed development is of a low scale and intensity and is compatible with the ground truth site constraints. On the ground, the development involves the replacement of one house with another larger house and the construction of a new driveway. The development will involve some earthworks and some vegetation clearing. However, the extent of the works proposed is largely confined to an already disturbed part of the site. And ecologically important vegetation will be protected in the western part of the site by the proposal. In order to limit the development of the site to what is proposed in the subject application, it is considered that the area of the land to be included in the low-density residential zone should be reduced to coincide with the area of proposed smaller Lot 10 only. This would ensure that any future subdivision of the larger Lot 9 would be subject to impact assessment. The recommendation is that Council receive and note the report, approve the combined application subject to the imposition of reasonable and relevant conditions, as outlined in Appendix A, and note all future requests for a negotiated decision and changes to be determined by delegation where such changes would not have a material impact on the outcome of the original decision.
Councillors, can I have someone move a motion for this item? Councillor Hungerford. A seconder? Councillor Suarez. Councillor Hungerford, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This one is in my division. This one has several non-compliances with the planning scheme at the moment. There's little to no records of those because it goes back so far. This has been an opportunity to consolidate within the limited development zone the application here and bring it back into more into compliance without intensification of use. And I'd actually like to congratulate the planners. They've done an excellent job on this one, and I wholeheartedly support this application today.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Are there any other councillors who wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not opposed to the motion. However, I do hope that because it's such a significant change, particularly to the native vegetation area, as part of what was there before, not only on this parcel but on adjoining parcels, I sincerely hope that when we do the town plan review, the new town plan, that we address that issue to make it appear less odd than what it is going to look. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Johnston. Any other councillors? Councillor Bunnag.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I just have a number of questions, if that's all right. Thank you. Should you confirm in relation to the existing dwellings that are on the site, is it fair to say that they're non-compliant with the current zoning of the planning scheme for that site?
Through you, Madam Mayor. I guess they would be, in terms of non-compliant, I mean, we believe that they're lawfully established. We only have records for one of them. But in terms of non-compliant, it would be unusual to have 3 dwelling houses existing on a block of land in any zone, let alone the limited development zone. And certainly if a proposal was put to council to establish 3 dwelling houses on a block of land in the limited development zone, that would be inconsistent with the current scheme.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Mayor, in relation to the stream watering, the recommendation or the language you used was around changing it from a 3 to a 4 to a 1 to 2. Could you give us some detail in terms of what a 3 to 4 stream water would mean for that particular site?
Through you, Madam Mayor, if the correct classification of the stream was a 3 to 4, it has been determined through a review of the characteristics of the stream and how streams are ordered, that it is actually a 1 to 2. But if the assessment had found that it had remained a 3 to 4, there is a provision in the reconfiguring of a lot code which talks about public esplanades being provided adjacent to stream orders of 3 to 4 and above. However, in this case, we would have had to have considered whether that would be a practical outcome for the proposal, given that there's no ability to link that up with any other publicly accessible land. That would be the main implication for the stream ordering remaining as a 3 to 4, had the assessment found that it should be a 3 to 4.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Mayor, final question. In relation to Councillor Johnston's observations, with respect to the ground truthing and assessment of the stream water on this site, was there any consideration of the impact that has on the other sites that are mapped as also being of this particular zoning and having those particular overlays to the north of this property?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Look, I guess through the new planning scheme deliberations, that can be looked at a bit in a different way. The mapping as it exists is 10 years old now. So there will be more refined mapping through development of the new planning scheme that can be investigated at that time to the extent of the information available on those adjoining properties.
Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, I reserve my rights to speak on the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Bunnag. Councillor Natoli.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And through you, just noting that one of the houses is going to be demolished and rebuilt, and considering the steepness of the site and the headwaters of the Martin Creek, is it possible to notate on the operational works when it comes up that we take particular notice of retention of any siltation that could end up in the Martin Creek? I mean, I've seen circumstances in very steep areas in Buderim in the past where there has been problems, especially with deluge, storm events that could end up not being contained within the actual construction site itself. So if I could just make that point, that would be a concern of mine, that if that was to get into that headwaters, that's where most of our problems come from developments, is that silt ends up in our waterways and the pollutions that come from that. It would be remiss of me not to be making some sort of comment in regards to the history of this site. And you're right, Maroochy Shire, obviously in the past, there aren't always records of some of these approvals, and they were obviously lawfully built at the time. And I understand the need to go through this process to try and bring it back into some sort of conformity. But the fact is that Charles Blackman lived in this location and is a noted modern artist in Australian history, and I would hope that some way down the track that we acknowledge the fact that maybe historically and heritage-wise we couldn't have saved the house that may have been the house that he actually lived in, but at least somehow in our community that we can acknowledge that history and it's not lost through any other means. So I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that he lived there and paid that sort of homage to a body of work that he created, where he created a series of rainforest works that were exhibited in the Queensland Art Gallery, and even though it may not be his noted works of the 50s, it's still a significant body of work that has been recognised, and they were created while they lived here in this location.
Thank you, Councillor Natoli. Councillor Law.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, a few questions, if I may. The first one, on one of the lots, if this is approved today, there appear to be a large range of footpaths. Are those paths available to the public, or is that just footpaths on the private land?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, they're just private footpaths that are within the property.
So we're not aware of any access that the school has to the property at all?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, we don't believe that any lawful access exists between this property and any other property. There's no access easements over those pathways. They're long-established pathways, and they do appear to provide for access to Buderim Mountain State School, but it's as an informal arrangement.
Thank you. And with the 3 dwellings that are on the property at the moment, do we know what their current use is?
Through you, Madam Mayor, when I inspected the site, at least 2 of them did appear to be occupied. I'm unsure if the small cottage that's proposed to be retained as a secondary dwelling, I'm unsure if that is occupied, but on inspection there did appear to be all the 2 larger houses were occupied.
All right, thank you. And my final question is, if this is approved, has the conditions package been created yet, or is that work yet to occur? And I'm particularly thinking around being able to make sure that the site is not used for short-term residential, because the scale and the quality of the property proposed to be built here looks like it could be used for short-term accommodation.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor, you asking that question in relation to the new dwelling house? Yeah. Look, the conditions package has been developed. We, as part of that conditions package, we include an advisory note that brings to people's attention that any short-term accommodation proposed for a new dwelling requires a development approval under the planning scheme. So I guess if that was intended or proposed, my understanding it is not intended or proposed at this time, but if it was, then a development application would be required for that, and that application would be subject to impact assessment under the Sunshine Coast Planning Scheme.
And sorry, one more question, if I may, Madam Mayor. With the scale of the slope on this site, with regard to operational works, has the geotechnical been done, and are we totally satisfied that the slope can support the proposed new developments on the lots?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, a geotechnical report was submitted with the application, and that's been reviewed by our engineering team. They are satisfied that the site is stable. I think the footings will go into a weathered rock layer, which will mean that it's quite stable, and our engineers are quite confident that it will be, despite the mapping of it being a landslide area, with that geotechnical report that's done the more detailed investigations, they are satisfied it will be stable, and there are conditions included on the material change of use of the dwelling house requiring the development to comply with the recommendations of the geotechnical report.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Law. Councillor Bunnag.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have some concerns regarding this particular proposal. The proposal essentially invites Council to make good the current arrangements on the subject land, which are non-conforming with the applicable zoning, being limited development landscape residential, which, as I understand it, is generally intended to be a single dwelling house with no new lots intended to be created. This site was included in the limited development landscape residential zone in the current planning scheme due to the presence of constraints, including flooding, ecologically important areas, landslide hazard, and steep land. While the rezoning is a unique proposal due to the unique set of circumstances and the presence of established development that is inconsistent or non-conforming with the current zoning, my view is that making good this non-conforming rezoning by rezoning sends the wrong message about the certainty and consistency of our planning scheme. The other issue that I have is with relation to varying the particular overlaying mapping. I'm particularly concerned about the mapping and inconsistencies regarding the location of Martins Creek and the mapping of the riparian protection area within the subject area. I note the officer's recommendation and makes reference to the stream water throughout the map site as it being a stream water 1 to 2, not a stream water 3 to 4. But having considered the adjoining properties and also the zoning in other areas surrounding this particular site, I am concerned that we are approaching this in a patchwork way rather than considering this entire corridor. The report from council officers has stated that the current updated council mapping will likely incorporate the revised stream water as a stream water 1 to 2. But that hasn't occurred yet and undoubtedly will need to involve further ground truthing of sites to the north of the subject area, which are also covered by this particular overlay as a consequence of Martins Creek running through those areas. In my view, a comprehensive review and ground truthing of that area is necessary as a first step, not a patchwork assessment, and as a revision, and we are being asked to do that today, which I understand has been necessitated by this application having been made. So they're the concerns that I have with this present application.
Thank you, Councillor Bunnag. Any other councillors? Councillor Suarez.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I just now have some questions after hearing Councillor Bunnag make his case. I understand that the reason we are revising the mapping is the timing with this application. And the comments that were made about having a comprehensive review regarding the map overlays, you mentioned would be done with the future planning scheme. Can you advise what the process would be if we didn't have a new review of our planning scheme to do a comprehensive mapping update of the entirety of that area? Would it be a planning scheme amendment process and the timing that it would take to undertake that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Suarez, are you asking in relation to the subject site or more broadly?
More broadly.
Okay, I might direct that question to strategic planning.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that would essentially involve a local planning exercise. It's difficult to put a time and budget on that, but it would be a fairly significant piece of work. One of the things I would just say in respect to Overlays generally is because they apply at a regional level, they are a trigger for consideration of an issue rather than providing an absolute level of certainty. So generally we like to apply them in a consistent fashion across the region, but it's a piece of work that could be done, but it would be effectively a local planning exercise for that area.
And just while you're at the podium, Mr Patey, just in regards to Councillor Johnson's comments, mapping will be undertaken across the region with the new planning scheme?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. That's correct. There has been a revision of all the overlays as part of the development of the new planning scheme, and that information is certainly improving and will be better than the current version of information in the scheme. I would also say that I have taken specific note of the matters that have been raised as part of this development application, and we do also with other development applications that come forward, and we look at those and feed those back into our process of refining our overlays as well.
Okay. Just one final question through Katrina. In terms of when we get individual applications, is it unusual to ground truth an application that doesn't quite match with what we have in our planning scheme overlays?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, it's not unusual at all. In fact, it's actually required. If you are proposing any form of development on an area that has some mapped overlays, there is the overlay codes require you to do an assessment to demonstrate that you're not proposing development that would be inconsistent with that overlay. So although this is unusual in that they're proposing a variation to the overlay mapping, most MCUs, reconfiguring of a lot, applications that have mapped overlays where development's proposed, some form of ground truthing needs to be undertaken for us to establish what is the impact of the development.
And I understand that the native vegetation overlay was ground truthed to reflect that the remaining vegetation was largely non-native species, including invasive species such as camphor laurel. And with this application, when it was considered by council officers, did the council officers undertake assessment of what vegetation would have to be removed for the dwelling and the new driveway? So individual trees were assessed in consideration of the decision.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, there is an arborist report that was submitted as part of the application which identifies which trees are proposed to be removed, and yes, the assessment team did consider what trees were going to be removed and the impact of that, and in consideration of the ecologically important area as a whole. And yes, while there are some native trees that are proposed to be removed, these are generally located in the disturbed area of the site and in and around property boundaries and existing dwellings on the site, and do not form part of that more intact, ecologically important area located to the west of the site in and around Martins Creek.
Thank you. I may speak to the motion now, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to say that I understand this is an unusual application, but I think that the work that the council officers have done have reflected what is on the ground and has essentially updated our mapping to be more robust. And I support the local councillor, Councillor Hungerford, in his support for this application.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. Councillor Law.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. One more question, please, if I may. Noting the reply to the conditions and short-term accommodation, any request to make this short-term accommodation would be an impact accessible development application. So the landowner at that time would have to make that application. Are we able to, through the conditions, through reasonable conditions, on both of the subsequent lots, ensure that we note it for prohibited development, that it can only be used for residential living on a long-term basis and not used as short-term accommodation, whether that's Airbnb or some other mechanism that would potentially put conflicting uses in what is an urban residential area?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Look, I guess a condition along those lines would probably not conflict with, but sort of go against the operation of the planning scheme. I mean, the planning scheme does make short-term accommodation impact assessment in both the low-density residential zone and in the limited development zone. It's probably worth noting that short-term accommodation in the limited development zone is not identified as a consistent use or even a potentially consistent use. So it's an inconsistent use. So like at face value, such a proposal would be in conflict with the scheme, and any application would have to provide, planning grounds to support that conflict. But so I don't believe that a condition would necessarily change that assessment if that was to occur in the future.
Thank you.
Ms Robinson, would you like to address?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Law, for the question. There's a couple of things happening here which we need to be a bit careful of. So some of those existing dwellings are pre-2014, where we didn't have control. You've got to be careful not to put what is known as an ultra vires condition, or a condition that limits something that could naturally be applied for into the future. So then the application does not propose short-term accommodation. So you've got to be careful to not put conditions on that are not considered reasonable and relevant, because they can be appealed by the applicant. So that's the caution to which I would give. So that's why the team have gone with an advisory note with regards to advising that if they were to use the new dwelling houses for short-term accommodation, they would need to lodge a development application, and as we've heard from the team, that development application would be impact accessible. So there's a couple of considerations in that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for the answers, and I'll speak to the motion. Quite a challenging one for me in regard to the topography of the land, the steepness where it is, the fact that it goes off into the waterways, and concerns around the impact on vegetation loss and also future impact on the vegetation in that area. Having said that, there are 3 dwellings on the property, and if this is approved, there will still be 3 dwellings or 3 available dwellings on the property that maintains our housing levels at the way that they are. The purpose of my questions around the short-term accommodation is due to the fact that we need to keep as much housing stock that we currently have available in a place for people to live and call their home, or a place for other people to rent and call their home. We have got far too much accommodation that sits empty and idle because it is caught up in short-term accommodation. So that's the reasons for my question. And the fact that we are able to resolve some issues around past planning matters, that's probably a good thing. I accept the reassurance that this would have to be impact accessible should someone try and use this as short-term accommodation. And so, notwithstanding my concerns of the environment and the waterways, I will support this today, encourage others to do so, because it will maintain 3 dwellings available for our community, and we need dwellings like they're just like no tomorrow. So on that basis, have to support it given the other concerns that I've had. And thank you on the development assessment team for doing what you've done to protect the waterways and the vegetation as much as we can, and at the same time allow this development to occur. So I will support this today, encourage others the same.
Thank you, Councillor Law. A question, Councillor Johnston?
Yes, I had 2 questions. The first one is because a number of my constituents have been told by our planners that if your dwelling was built before 2014, that we can't stop you from, you don't have to apply for permission for short-term accommodation. Is that factual?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's yeah. Because the current planning scheme introduced the definition of short-term accommodation.
So that means that the 2 existing buildings that are going to be retained could be used for short-term accommodation without an application.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the smaller cottage that is proposed to be retained on the larger lot, they've sought a material change of use for that to be used as a secondary dwelling. So a proposal to use that as short-term accommodation, if the development takes effect, would be inconsistent with that approval for the dwelling house.
It's a pre-existing structure. It was built prior to 2014.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yeah, that's correct, Councillor. If this development application was not before us, they could use that as for short-term accommodation.
However, the one on the separate parcel could be used for short-term accommodation.
Through you, Madam Mayor, you're talking about the main house on the smaller lot?
The existing main, yeah. All right. The second thing is, I just want to ask a question. Councillor Suarez asked a question about ground truthing and what's going to be in the future town plan. My understanding is that when we review all of these restrictions, limitations around slope, bushfires, where streams are, where protected areas are, when we do review it, is it true that it's not going to be, in most instances, truth surveyed? It's going to be general, based on imaging that we have going to get, or which we currently have, which is a lot more detailed. Is that true?
Through you, Madam Mayor, is that a question for the mapping associated with the new scheme?
Maybe Stephen could answer that one.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor, thank you for your question. As I sort of said earlier, the range of overlays in the new planning scheme will be reviewed, and there's quite a number of those relating to biophysical constraints. With respect to the native vegetation areas, which we're talking about here, there are a couple of things going on that are just worth commenting on. The first one is that we have an obligation in the planning scheme to reflect layers provided to us by the state for certain elements. And that mapping, because it's done at a whole state level, is generally not fantastic at a regional level. But we can't alter that. We've actually got to translate it directly into the scheme. When it comes to sort of more local vegetation-based overlays, it's a combination primarily of improved aerial photography, plus also some more detailed site assessments. But those site assessments aren't done across every site in the region. That just would be cost prohibitive for the work that we're doing across the range of overlays. And so it's about finding that sweet spot around making sure the overlay is as accurate as it can be at a regional level, but also recognising that it is just a trigger for consideration of issues, and there will always be a requirement for more detailed assessment to be done at a site-by-site level.
All right, just one more quick question of you. What you're saying, is what you're saying that it's going to be a lot better than it currently is? But what about the situation where what we've discovered and it's at variance with the state, are we still obligated to accept the state's boundaries?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, for certain elements of certain overlays, we have an obligation under state planning policy to reflect the state mapping. And that sometimes is a bit incongruous. To be fair, the state mapping is also improving for some overlays, but not all. But yeah, that's definitely part of the circumstance, Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Johnston. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you very much. Well, it's an enormously thorough assessment for a subdivision, an extremely small subdivision to be coming to council, reconfiguration of a lot. It's before council. The local councillor has said that he's been through the process with the staff. In fact, we only had 2 submissions from local residents in Buderim. So if that tells you anything, in Buderim, if there's tree clearing and development, you're going to hear from them. You're going to hear from them in the thousands. And you've had 2 submissions, and those submissions, if you read the responses from the staff, have been adequately addressed. You can just see that in the written report. One point that Councillor Winston talked on is just that mapping process we go through in terms of layers. So when you do the planning scheme, obviously this site limited development, we talk about the constraints on the site, your steep slope hazard and your bushfire and vegetation, primarily that vegetation. That's been ground truth. So you've had professionals go out on site. I'm assuming they've tagged trees because they're numbered in terms of species and what the number of trees are. So the staff have been out there, they've appraised the site. We've actually ground truthed our own mapping to a further degree, which actually reflects what's on the site today. So one point that Councillor Winston's made that's important for the future, we keep getting told we don't want to be a Gold Coast, we don't want high-rise, we don't want these enormous high-density developments. Well, you've got a resident here who's trying to retain a larger lot, something very sympathetic to the area in Buderim. In fact, there are a lot smaller lots in Buderim today than this one. This one is actually significantly larger, and it reflects the old character of Buderim that we need to protect. So I'm all for that. But my point is, I wonder how many other lots in the area or across the Sunshine Coast are mapped or excluded from development because of those higher order mapping layers. In terms of what's available if they're actually ground truthed, I'm wondering if there's actually more of these larger lots that we may be able to achieve in our community that can provide the larger lots people are looking for. So I'm hoping the new scheme will pick up on that, because I'd love to see some larger lots in our communities like this. I will be supporting the recommendation today, and I think the staff have done an enormously thorough review of this. And in fact, Katrina Patey and Steve Patey would not be recommending this for approval if this was not something that could be supported by the staff. I can tell you that.
Thanks, Councillor Dixon. Any other councillors? No? Councillor Hungerford, would you like to close?
Thank you for the debate and the councillors looking at things here. The complexity the staff have had with this one is you've got non-conformity there in buildings that were on the site. Little to no records, and particularly that they pertain probably pre-2014, under planning law it's given existing use rights. That's the complexity the staff have had to work with. So I think they've done an excellent job in consolidating this, this to what's on site without intensification of use. So I'm very confident to support this today. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hungerford. I'll now put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Councillors Broderick, Landsberg, Burns, Natoli, Johnston, Dixon, Hungerford, Suarez, Law and Natoli. Those against? Councillor Banayak. The motion is carried. Thank you. Moving now to item 8.2, welcome Mr Costello and Ms Dunbar. Good morning, Mr Costello.
How are you? Morning all. Presenting the monthly financial performance report for March. So Council's overall operating result at the end of March was 122.1 million, ahead of the current budget by 2.3 million. The major variations being revenue being below budget by 4.6 and expenses below budget by 6.9 million. Of the revenue, there were fees below budget for plumbing applications, quarry services and Caloundra Music Festival, somewhat offset by the contract expenses below budget for waste management, solar farm energy charges, quarry services and the Caloundra Music Festival. The holiday parks, to note, were ahead of revenue by $1.5 million, expenses up by $1 million, but a net result of $500,000 ahead of budget, so it's good news. On our capital expenditure, we progressed 62.4% of our total capital works of $332 million for the year, that's $207 million. And on our core capital program, we're $91.5 million, which is a spend of 54%. Council's cash at the end of March is just under $280 million, and our debt is $418 million at the end of March. Anticipated borrowings, which will draw down late May, early June of 28.5 to give us a anticipated $446 million debt at the end of June. And on our investments, we currently have 17 term deposits totalling $180 million, term deposits averaging up to just under 180 days, and a weighted average interest return of 5.1%. And the recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Michael. Councillors, can I have someone move a motion for this item? Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. A seconder, Councillor Natoli. Councillor Hungerford, would you like to speak to the motion?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Another excellent result, and you've got to consider all the wet weather we've had for delivering stuff on the ground and the unsustainably high construction index, the cost of actually producing those things. So for Council to end up at this point with a favourable operating result of $122 million, that's below budget of 4.6, but then your expenses are also below budget by 6.9. That results in a 2.3 million favourable variance. Hopefully the weather picks up and we'll be able to get on with our capital works and actually deliver more on the ground. As of the 31st of March, 533 million operating revenue has been achieved. 411 million has been expended, resulting in the variance, like we said before, 6.9 million or 1.7% below budget. With the wet weather we've had, that's not surprising. As of the 31st of March, 207 million, 62% of Council's 332.6 million capital works program has been financially expended. With the core capital program has progressed 54% of budget, with an actual spend of 91.5 million. Remembering those expenditures support our local businesses and keep them going in these times, especially with the wet weather and downtime. That helps those businesses. And our corporate major projects have progressed 69%. So when you consolidate all that, it's very pleasing to see. When you see our charts on our cash management, rather than going downhill, it's rather steady. I think other levels of government would love to have a chart like that. So our Council's cash as the 31st of March consists of 279.5 million. And equally, we're keeping our debt down. Council's debt as of the 31st of March is 418 million. But with the waste services coming up, there's another 28 million of expenditure there. So we're in a very healthy position, but we need to maintain that discipline into the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Landsberg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'd like to obviously just support our financial report and thank the team for the great job they do behind the scenes. I just wanted to raise, and I've raised this several times with our project officers, the black spot funding for Beer Bar and Karoi T intersection. And we had funding there available. To date, we've spent a small portion on that project. I have concerns about the actual data that was used to accredit it for black spot funding. I feel it's an intersection that we may be over-engineering within Dickey Beach, and it's about signalised in the T intersection. And I'd like to continue to work with the team in regards to what modifications we could, or improvements we could do to that intersection, subjected before going to a major upgrade like signalising, because I think we need to take into effect the delivery of the Caloundra Transport Corridor upgrade and the significant reduction in traffic that will bring through that area. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Landsberg. Councillor Natoli.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Michael, I noticed that our capital works progress at this stage 62.4% through, but I noticed that core capital works is only 54%. Any idea of whether we are going to be able to meet those targets and get to 100% by the end of this financial year?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have a forecast of just under 150 million, so we're looking at a potential carryover, but we'll be aiming for 90% completion the weather hasn't helped, so we're probably actually going to be around about 85% complete, but those jobs will then come back for a budget review and will continue into next financial year.
Any other councillors? No? Councillor Hungerford, would you like to close?
Madam Mayor, another excellent result. We're going into budget deliberations at the moment, especially for the new councillors. There's a lot to get your head around in only a few months, so I do sympathise with that. And what I'd like to do is actually congratulate our finance staff, Michael and your team. Pleasure always to work with you, and the financial reports are always well up to standard, and that's why we get unmodified audits year after year, and we maintain our credit rating. So to you and your staff, you need the credit as well for helping produce this.
Thanks, Councillor Hungerford. I'll now put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr Costello. Councillors, item 8.3, welcome to Ms Nelson to present both for this item and item 8.4.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and good morning, councillors. This report is presented to you today for your consideration of the amended Councillor Acceptable Request Guidelines. Council is required to have in place guidelines that specify the way in which a councillor may ask a local government employee for information or advice to assist the councillor in carrying out his or her responsibilities under the Local Government Act, and to make provision for the reasonable limits on requests that a councillor may make. These guidelines must be adopted by Council. The current guidelines were adopted in 2018, and since then there have been legislative amendments impacting the guidelines. For clarity, none of those changes have affected the legitimate operation of the existing guidelines. However, it is important that Council policies are contemporary with legislation. Section 173 of the Act now confirms that councillors must not give directions to council employees except those employees that provide administrative support to councillors. Without that clause in the legislation, the ability for councillors to be provided with administrative support could be questioned. The updated policy reflects the legislation that makes the provision of administrative support to councillors operable. Further, in November 2023, the councillor conduct provisions of the Act were significantly amended. These changes also prompted an update to the Code of Conduct for Councillors in Queensland, which, with reference to this guideline, replaces the term inappropriate conduct with conduct breach and reflects that such breaches will be referred to the Office of the Independent Assessor in accordance with the Act. Finally, and to assist councillors and staff, definitions of what constitutes a request versus a direction are now included. With that, I commend the updated Councillor Acceptable Request Guidelines to you for endorsement.
Councillors, can I have someone to move this item? Councillor Johnston, and a seconder, Councillor Burns. Councillor Johnston, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you very much, Tory. I'd just like to point out that although councillors can direct their CSOs, their Councillor Service Officer, to do certain things, that's not entirely what they can do. They can only do so within the rules and regulations of the council and the government. And legislation. So it's not carte blanche, it's just that if we were to say to an ordinary council officer that we want them to send an email to a particular person about a certain thing, we'd have to frame it as a request, not as an instruction, whereas when it comes to our CSOs, we can say, send this to so-and-so. So, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Johnston. Councillor Natoli.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Obviously, legislation, state government and changes to local government, a massive change since I was elected previously in the Mauritius Shire Council in 1997. And I can understand that the legislation is brought in to try and make sure that we're not setting directions to officers in a particular way, but there's still often comments that come from the community that say, you're the elected member, you can do something about it, you need to do this, you need to instruct. And it's very difficult for our community to know that as a collective body, as a council, we make decisions and we give directions clearly through the CEO on what we, as a collective group, but as an individual councillor, we have no power at all to be able to instruct, neither the CEO or any council staff, except our own administrative staff. There's a lot of grovelling that goes on, pleading, wishing, hoping, asking questions. That's, I suppose, the skill of a councillor in being able to get around and hopefully find ways of being able to open a discussion and to be able to get things and having that discussion with council officers. But it is a fine line sometimes, and I hope that throughout the organisation there's never that intention that, you know, when we're under pressure from our community, that we are given some leeway when sometimes that definition. And I know that sometimes some of the comments and questions that are asked, especially through things like our community lands permit, they're asking for specific responses from council. And I know in one particular instance where I particularly said that I would not support something unless a particular thing happened. That was just my feedback. It wasn't giving directions, it was just my feedback. So I know that that was sort of came back to me that maybe I was overstepping the line, but I think that there needs to be some clarity in that regards, that when we're asked this feedback, we give that clear feedback. They can either take it or leave it. It's not a direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Natoli. Councillor Suarez.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I just have a question about process. Now, something was raised with me at the very last hour, 11th hour, which doesn't change the policy's intent. It's just probably some of the language that's used within. I note in the report that we will review the policy every 4 years. If there are to be any minor changes to perhaps language or wording that was used, what's the process to do that? Does it have to come back to council for a full decision, or can an amendment be made?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think Mr Matheson is going to answer that question.
Through the Mayor, Councillor, very good question. While we have a policy review program that's in place and that sits under a policy that Council itself has already adopted, that doesn't preclude earlier reviews and amendments to policy. Because this is an adopted Council policy, it can only be amended through further adoption by Council. So if we do need to amend the policy, for instance, for changes in legislation or a circumstance arises that hasn't been contemplated, we would need to bring that back to Council for amendment.
Thanks, Mr Matheson. Councillor Suarez? No. No other speakers? No. Okay. Councillor Johnston, would you like to close? No? Thank you, councillors. I'll now put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That has been carried unanimously. Thank you, Ms Nelson. Now moving on to 8.4, and we welcome you back.
This report presents to Council for endorsement the Councillor Expenses and Resources Policy. Under Section 250 of the Local Government Regulation, every council in Queensland must adopt a policy that provides for the payment of reasonable expenses incurred or to be incurred by councillors, as well as the provision of facilities to councillors to assist them in discharging their duties and responsibilities as councillors. The purpose of this policy is to ensure that councillors are appropriately and adequately supported to carry out their roles. This policy also sets the parameters to authorise the payment of reasonable expenses and outlines the facilities or resources provided to councillors. The amended policy does not deviate significantly from the existing councillor expenses and provision of facilities and support policy, with our first recommended amendment being a name change to the more manageable councillor expenses and resources policy. Many of the amendments are minor and have been made to provide clarity for both councillors and for staff. That is, for the most part, the expenses incurred and the facilities provided are not altered, and nor are the approval processes changed. I will, however, briefly highlight those amendments that do alter councillor entitlements. Firstly, in line with Council's motor vehicle policy, councillors will be provided with the opportunity to utilise a private vehicle in lieu of the provision of a council fleet vehicle and be reimbursed business expenses up to a specified amount. Currently, most councillors are provided with a fleet vehicle and make a private use contribution by fortnightly payroll deduction. This inclusion aims to provide councillors with flexibility in terms of vehicle arrangements that best suit their personal circumstances. Secondly, the policy now reflects that councillors are paying for parking at council administration buildings such as this one. Finally, and in line with council's corporate travel policy, this policy makes clear that when councillors travel overseas on endorsed council business, they are required to share their experiences as well as the learnings and benefits derived from the travel with their colleagues on their return. All expenses associated with overseas travel must be reported in council's annual report. I should note also that the expenses incurred under this policy, along with the facilities provided, are also reported in council's annual report. Councillors, thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. Councillors, can I have a mover? Councillor Dixon. Seconder? Councillor Suarez. Councillor Dixon, would you like to speak?
Yes, and through you, Madam Mayor. This policy is very important because our council, and particularly councillors, are scrutinised intensely by members of the public. And it's comments like free lunches and free gifts and donations and things like that that make this policy very important, because people need to know what we stand for, what the policy allows, and they need to see the transparency. And there's no more transparency than seeing this here today. The public can actually see all the details of what is provided to councillors. Not only that, but summaries in the annual report as well. And having been a councillor for nearly 18 years, I can tell you the governance around this is extremely tight. In fact, there are a number of staff in this room here today that will assess any reasonable request and give that approval either in writing or give you a reason why it doesn't fit the policy. And in fact, that process is extremely thorough, and I appreciate that. But there's also something else that's been touched on here today, which I think is a bit of a proud moment. People will think it's just a very small thing, but by majority, councillors decided that we now pay to park here. So there is no free parking if you're a councillor. In fact, many of our staff pay to park nearby around the facility, and councillors as elected representatives pay for our own parking now as well. So we're on that same level as our staff, and we look to be treated fairly and evenly as an organisation. And I believe senior management and management also pay to park here too. So when the CEO talks about one team, we're really trying to live that. But again, this is very important. This sets clear rules. And in fact, in my time in council, I don't believe I've seen anyone abuse the policy. It's treated with respect, and very important for us to have, given that, you know, we are very visible members of the community and servants of the public. So really support this and appreciate all the support that we do get from the council as councillors.
Thanks, Councillor Dixon. Anyone else to speak? No. Councillor, would you like to close? Or... Okay, I'll now put the motion to the vote then. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Councillors, I think it would be appropriate, thank you, Ms Nelson. It would be appropriate now to stop for morning tea, so I'll adjourn the meeting for 15 minutes, so we'll return here at 10:45. Thank you, councillors. We are going to now move on to item 8.5. Councillors, before we commence item 8.5, I'll ask the Group Executive for Civic Governance, Mr Matheson, to give a brief overview of how the requirements for the management of conflicts of interest will apply to this item. Welcome, Mr Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good morning, councillors. Just very briefly, councillors, as you know, Chapter 5B of the Local Government Act outlines the provisions that govern the management of councillor conflicts of interest. And those provisions apply in the majority of circumstances, other than there are certain limited circumstances where those provisions do not apply. The report that is before you in agenda item 8.5 is one of those instances where the provisions will apply to one aspect of that report and will not apply to another aspect. So just very briefly, and by way of quick explanation, the relevant provision in the Act is section 150EF2, which says that effectively says that the chapter relating to councillor conflict of interest provisions, which is Chapter 5B, does not apply in relation to a councillor's conflict of interest in a matter relating to a corporation or association that arises solely because of a nomination or appointment of the councillor by the local government to be a member of the board of the corporation or association. The emphasis that I've placed there deliberately is on the words of the board. The report at item 8.5 deals with two particular appointments. One, the first aspect is the appointment of the director and alternate director to the board of the Council of Mayors South East Queensland. Because those appointments, the nominations for those appointments involve Madam Mayor and also Councillor Suarez, and they are appointments to the board of that corporation, the conflict of interest provisions do not apply to that aspect of this report. So in relation to that matter, there is no relevant conflict of interest to declare. However, the second aspect of the report deals with the nomination of Madam Mayor to a position on the Local Government Association of Queensland Policy Executive. Again, the LGAQ is a company under the Corporations Act. However, the Policy Executive is not the board of the LGAQ. The board is a separate and distinct entity from the Policy Executive. So therefore, in this instance, albeit a technicality, but Chapter 5B, which governs conflicts of interest, does apply to the nomination that's being put forward to the Local Government Association of Queensland Policy Executive. So on that basis, and I have advised Madam Mayor of this matter that she would need to consider making a declarable conflict of interest, notifying a declarable conflict of interest in relation to that aspect only of the report, and also as Madam Mayor is a related party of Councillor Natoli, Councillor Natoli will also need to consider notifying a declarable conflict of interest.
Thanks, Mr Matheson. Councillors, I wish to notify you that I may have a declarable conflict of interest in item 8.5, councillor appointments to external bodies to be considered at today's ordinary meeting. The declarable conflict of interest may arise due to the fact that I am the councillor who's being recommended for nomination as the District 2 North representative on the Policy Executive of the Local Government Association of Queensland Limited. The relevant exclusion of the application of the councillor conflict of interest provisions in Chapter 5B of the Local Government Act 2009, which is Section 150EF2 of the Act, relates to the nomination or appointment of a councillor to be a member of the board of a corporation or association. The Policy Executive of the LGAQ is not the board of the LGAQ. And Section 150EF2 of the Act is not therefore applicable in the case of a nomination by council of a councillor to the Policy Executive of the LGAQ. In making this notification, I note that the nomination is being proposed by council officers, not myself. The nomination is intended to provide an opportunity for the interests of the Sunshine Coast Council to be represented and advanced through the formulation and implementation of the advocacy priorities of the LGAQ on behalf of local governments in Queensland. The nomination if endorsed by Council and ultimately supported by other councils who make up the District 2 North cohort, is considered unlikely to materially impact public trust in my ability to objectively discharge my responsibilities as Mayor of the Sunshine Coast Council. If I am ultimately endorsed as a member of the policy executive of the LGAQ, the benefit I receive, which is a meeting fee of $560 per meeting and accommodation and travel costs to attend meetings, is relatively minor when compared to the value that Council and the region may receive in having their interests represented by me in shaping the priorities and advocacy program of the LGAQ. The need to notify this declarable conflict of interest arises due to the technical drafting and interpretation of Section 150EF2 of the Act, which is limited to circumstances where the nomination is to the board of a corporation or association. As the policy executive of the LGAQ is not the board of the LGAQ, the Chapter 5B conflict of interest provisions will apply to any nomination. If the policy executive were the board of the LGAQ, the conflict of interest provisions would not apply. On this basis, I have formed the view that I can appropriately manage what I consider to be a technical conflict of interest and that I can impartially make a decision in the public interest on the matter which is subject of agenda item 8.5, which is to be considered at the meeting today. Councillors, for the record, I would like to be noted that my notification of this declarable conflict of interest relates solely to that aspect of the agenda report dealing with the nomination of myself as the District 2 North representative on the policy executive of the LGAQ. I am of the view that I do not have a declarable conflict of interest to notify in relation to the nomination of myself as a Director of the Board of the Council of Mayors South East Queensland Proprietary Limited, as the conflict of interest provisions in Chapter 5B of the Local Government Act 2009 do not apply to that matter, as it is a nomination to the board of that company. As I have already advised, Section 150EF of the Act makes it clear that the conflict of interest provisions do not apply in circumstances where the nomination is to the board of a corporation or association. I will now ask that the Deputy Mayor take the chair so that Council may consider whether or not I may participate in the discussion and decision for agenda item 8.5.
Thank you. Councillors, in accordance with Section 150ES of the Local Government Act 2009, I now call for a councillor to move that Mayor Natoli either stay or leave the chamber for the duration of the discussion and decision on item 8.5. Councillors, should the majority decide it is in the public interest for the Mayor to stay in the meeting for the duration of this matter, reasons for this decision will need to be recorded in the minutes. Madam Mayor and Councillor Natoli, I note that you are not eligible to participate in this vote due to an interest. Can I please have someone to move that Mayor Natoli either stay or leave for this item, or stay for the discussion and not participate in the decision? Councillor Law? A seconder?
So this is,
can you stand up and just...
Sorry, through you, Deputy Mayor. I would propose a motion that Mayor Natoli may not participate in item 8.5. Will the reasons?
No reasons.
No reason. If there is a seconder, I'll make a comment.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Johnston? Councillor Law, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. Just by way of explanation for the reasons of why I moved the motion not to stay in the room, is that while it is a technical and drafting matter that says the Mayor may not be part of it, and this is then going to go out to the broader local government community to seek positions with the LGAQ and advocate for us on behalf of the LGAQ, which are very important things to do. I think as a council, we do not want to have anything left to doubt at all by any other local government representative or any member of the LGAQ executive or board or the staff who work for the LGAQ to have any doubt that we have gone through the correct process, albeit a technical process. We've had the comment, drafting and technical issues of that particular section. But I think for our certainty and clarity around the process, we should follow in accordance with those technical drafting errors. So that's the reason that I say not to stay.
Thank you, Councillor Law. Do any other councillors have any questions for Mayor Natoli or Councillor Law?
No, I've got no doubt that Madam Mayor would be able to carry out her duties and her role without any bias whatsoever. I just think that it's probably a good look from her point of view to leave the room. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Broderick, Councillor Landsberg, Councillor Burns, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Dixon, Councillor Hungerford, Councillor Bunneg, Councillor Law and Councillor Suarez. Carried unanimously. No, it's carried. The motion is carried. So, Madam Mayor, I'd ask you to please leave the room for the remainder of this item. Councillor Natoli, I understand you wish to inform the meeting of a conflict of interest. Do I say this bit first?
To leave the room and not participate in the discussion or vote on the issue, so I will leave the room now.
Just Councillor Natoli, you just need to read the declaration first.
Still require me to read the declaration?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Just, Councillor Natoli, just the top section of that declaration.
So, councillors, I wish to notify you that I have a declarable conflict of interest in item 8.5, council appointment to external bodies. To be considered at today's ordinary meeting, the declarable conflict of interest may arise because Mayor Rosanna Natoli, who is a related party of mine, due to her being my spouse, has notified a declarable conflict of interest in this matter due to the fact that Mayor Natoli is a councillor who has been recommended for the nomination as the District 2 North representative on the policy executive of the Local Government Association of Queensland Limited. The relevant exclusion of the application of the councillor's conflict of interest provisions in Chapter 5B of the Local Government Act 2009, which is Section 150 EF2 of the Act, relates to the nomination or appointment of a councillor to be a member of the board of the corporation or association. The policy executive of the LGAQ is not the board of the LGAQ, and Section 150 EF2 of the Act is not therefore applicable in the case of the nomination of the local of a councillor to the policy executive of the LGAQ. And in making this notification, I intend not to participate and stay in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Natoli. Okay, I'll ask Mr Matheson to now present item 8.5.
Through the Chair, good morning again, councillors. The report that is before you today on agenda item 8.5 deals with two appointments that councillors usually asked to consider early in the term of a new council. They relate to our representatives on the board of the Council of Mayors South East Queensland, pardon me, Proprietary Limited, and that is in terms of a director and alternate director. And the second is in relation to a nominee to be considered as the District 2 North representative of the Policy Executive of the LGAQ. I'll just deal with each of those briefly in turn. In terms of the Council of Mayors South East Queensland Board, there really is no discretion under the Constitution for the Council of Mayors South East Queensland in relation to who is the director and alternate director put forward by the council, because the Constitution of the Council of Mayors South East Queensland provides that the director must be the mayor and the alternate director must be the deputy mayor if there is a deputy mayor. However, we put this matter before council because these are matters that do create an interest for both the mayor and the deputy mayor, and on that basis we feel it's a prudent course of action to have council to endorse that nomination. There is no additional remuneration payable to either the mayor or the deputy mayor in undertaking those roles. In relation to the second aspect of the report, it deals with the nominee from the cohort of councils, which is the Sunshine Coast Regional Council, the City of Moreton Bay Council and the Noosa Shire Council, to be the District 2 North representative on the Policy Executive for the Local Government Association of Queensland. The Policy Executive comprises the President of the LGAQ, who is elected by popular vote by all of the membership of the Local Government Association, and 15 district representatives. And as I indicated earlier, we are part of the District 2 North cohort of 3 councils. The nomination that's been put forward is that our mayor be nominated for that role. Should either of the other 2 councils who make up that District 2 North cohort also put forward a nomination, then the nominees will be put to a ballot of the 3 participating councils in that cohort. At this stage, I don't have any degree of certainty as to whether there are nominees from the other 2 councils, but we are required to notify our nomination by the 1st of May, and hence that is why this matter is here before you today. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillors, can I have someone move the motion? Councillor Johnston? Okay, Councillor Hungerford moves the motion and Councillor Johnston seconder. Councillor Hungerford, would you like to speak to the motion?
Through you, Madam Chair. It does make sense to have our Mayor and Deputy Mayor as our representatives on the LGAQ. That's the protocol that's always been in Queensland. I think the way we've dealt with this today is the correct way to deal with it as well. Removes all doubt and has it on a... So I'm very happy that we've conducted ourselves very competently and responsibly under the Act and under the provisions of conflicts of interest. I think this is exemplary what we're doing today, but I wholeheartedly support having our Mayor and our Deputy Mayor as our representatives is the correct action.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Hungerford, would you like to close? No need. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Can we ask Madam Mayor and Councillor Natoli to return to the meeting, please?
Councillors, before we commence items 8.6, I'll ask Mr Matheson to explain how the management of conflicts of interest apply to this item. Thank you, Mr Matheson.
Through the Chair, Madam Mayor, thank you for the invitation. Councillors, a few moments ago I indicated that Chapter 5B provides limited circumstances where the provisions of that chapter do not apply in relation to councillor conflicts of interest. In relation to the report that is before you today at agenda item 8.6, Chapter 5B does not apply to the matters contained in this report. The relevant provision in that sense is section 150 EF1F of the Act, which says that the chapter does not apply in relation to a conflict of interest in a matter if the matter is solely or relates solely to employment-related or upgraded travel or accommodation undertaken or used by a councillor or close associate or related party of a councillor. In the context of this report, Madam Mayor does not need to notify a prescribed conflict of interest or a declarable conflict of interest because she is the councillor who is proposed to be undertaking the travel and receiving the accommodation, and the travel and accommodation is employment related. And likewise, Councillor Natoli does not need to notify a prescribed conflict of interest or declarable conflict of interest because the Mayor is a close associate and related party to him, and the provisions do not apply, and with that non-application extends to employment-related travel undertaken by a close associate or related party. I apologise for the technical explanation, but the bottom line is that the provisions do not apply in the context of this report.
Thank you, Mr Matheson. I'll ask now Mr Switzer to present for this item. Welcome.
Morning, Madam Mayor. Good morning, councillors. And thanks for the introduction, Craig. Today's presentation is regarding, in this item before Council, is in respect to the Olympic and Paralympic Games Brisbane 2032, and specifically Council's representation as part of the Paris 2024 Olympic Family Program. The Olympic family, as the slide in front of you suggests, includes the International Olympic Committee, International Paralympic Committee, sports federations, NOCs, which are National Olympic Committees, Olympic partner sponsors, future organising committees, which are referred to as OCOGs. In our instance, that's Brisbane 2032, rights holding broadcasters, and selected international dignitaries. In respect to the Brisbane 2032 delegation, invites have been extended to those people on that slide in front of you today. And in addition, other Games delivery partners, including the AOC, Paralympics Australia and the federal government, will also be attending as part of the Olympic family. So this Olympic family, the Australian delegation, it's not a large delegation, and receiving an invite into the Olympic family is significant and reflects our status as a co-host city for the 2032 Games. In respect to Paris, there'll be a series of events and functions and meetings hosted by the following, for which the Mayor will be invited. That itinerary is still being finalised, but those invitations will come from groups such as the International Olympic Committee, AOC, the World Union of Olympic Cities, of which Sunshine Coast Council is a member. The Australian Government will be holding events and functions, Brisbane 2032 Organising Committee, and also looking to liaise with the Paris City Council. Importantly too, there's also the opportunity to attend competition events, and I'll talk to later in the presentation the benefits of doing such. And in particular for the period in which the Mayor has proposed to be in Paris, there are a number of events that Sunshine Coast are proposed to host during that time that she will be in Paris. That includes basketball, road cycling, football, mountain bike, race walk, and other events, including the opening ceremony, and also events that would be called classified as being non-Olympic events, such as the Cultural Olympiad and live site and community celebrations across Paris. So the duties of the Mayor would be to officially represent the Council at these official functions and events, to network with past and future Games City hosts and Games delivery partners, and to really obtain a deeper understanding of the legacy outcomes that can be derived from being an Olympic and Paralympic Games co-host city. It is importantly to observe the operations of the City of Paris and the competition venues during Games times, to capture those learnings and to bring those learnings back through Council. and also to develop some strategic relationships. As mentioned, that Olympic family is quite a small group of individuals, but the opportunity to develop those relationships with those partners and international sporting federations will be particularly important. The benefits of the Mayor attending Paris 2024, as I mentioned, to observe those events proposed to be held on the Sunshine Coast, understand the experience of a spectator as to what our region will look like in 2032, understanding and observing firsthand the community impacts for host cities during a mega event, ensuring the Sunshine Coast makes the most of opportunities from the 2032 Games. I mentioned the Cultural Olympiad and the opportunity to understand what that arts and cultural offering could look like. Really getting on feet, on ground, look at what the opportunities will be for local businesses from the Games. And a really important one, I think, is to view the transport offerings, not only for 2032, but seeing how world-class City operates. But particularly if we do look for 2032, one of the opportunities will be looking at the itinerary upon the Mayor's approval to attend the Olympic family is an opportunity to go to regions such as Lille, which is an hour and a half outside of Paris, would be travelling by train, and it's a regional venue that's hosting basketball. So if you look at the parallels between what's happening in Lille and what will be happening on the Sunshine Coast in 2032, there's some good parallels there. Finance and resourcing is that as part of the being invited to be part of the Olympic family, accommodation, event access, seating and on-ground transport services are funded by the International Olympic Committee. Any funding that needs to be sourced for the Mayor's trip can be accommodated through Council's current operational budget, and the CEO will allocate resources to assist in preparing for attendance at the program. And the recommendation before you is to note the report and to, I'll go back to it, and to approve overseas travel for the Mayor between 24th of July 2024 to the 1st of August 2024. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Switzer. Councillors, can I have someone move a motion? Oh, Councillor Johnson. Oh. A seconder? Councillor Suarez. Councillor Johnson.
So, Madam Mayor, I rise in relation to this particular issue because I think it's vital that we are represented at this event. I know that Madam Mayor was somewhat dubious about going to this so early in her term. However, she did discuss it with us all, and we unanimously said that she must go to represent us. And it should be noted that Madam Mayor is going on economy class, not business class, and she actually had suggested that perhaps she would pay for that herself, and we as councillors said no, if you're going on behalf of the council, you go at the council's expense. So this is really important. We've got 7 or so events coming up in 2032 on the Sunshine Coast. The knowledge that you will gain for the council in your report when you bring it back will be vital for us. And there's a lot of insights that you will obtain that we can't get without being there to be party to the particular situation in relation to crowd control, in relation to venues, facilities, etc., as well as many other things. And the contacts that you will make while you're over there will be very important to this council. So I urge all councillors to support this.
Thanks, Councillor Johnston. Councillor Landsberg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I rise as well to speak in support of the officer's recommendation. Just a question that has been posed to me by several members of the community is, and maybe just to hear from yourself, Madam Mayor, is the opportunity to develop strategic partnerships, and especially a lot of ad hoc meetings that will obviously arise over there. Did you want to just maybe discuss what you're really, looking forward to, And a comment that I'd also like to make to our staff is, I know that you're travelling, as an individual. The opportunity for this is, I'm surprised that the report does not include a supporting council staff officer to travel with you as well, because I can imagine the amount of information for you to collect and retain as yourself would be huge. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Landsberg. I might ask Mr Switzer just to address the bit about the council officers, because there are some travelling, and then I'll answer the other question.
Certainly, there's Councillor Landberg on page 162. There is worth noting that the Sunshine Coast Council will be represented in Paris through the Olympic Observer Program. So there'll be 2 positions on the Olympic Observer Program filled by council officers for the Olympic Games, and 1 position on the Paralympic Games Observer Program. So whilst that is a separate program to the Olympic family program, there will be opportunities for those staff to be liaising and accompanying Madam Mayor to some of those briefings, events and meetings. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Landsberg. As I have spoken to a lot of people about this, and I'll just make this about answering your question, I'll still reserve my right to speak. One of the things I am looking forward to is representing the Sunshine Coast at all of those functions where I'll be interacting with other representatives from across the world, and in particular with the Olympic family, and now that the Sunshine Coast has recently joined the World Union of Olympic Host Cities. So that is something that I'm looking forward to and that I see will be really important and vital in my role as Mayor, as well as arguing for the inclusion of those events which are not yet confirmed for the Sunshine Coast, and holding our ground and securing other infrastructure. So I'll talk more to that when I have a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And particularly for us as a region, I know we spoke about the importance of live sites for a lot of the other multiple sports that we'll be able to witness, and I think feedback, I'll be looking forward to the report that you'll bring back, but I'm sure a focus will be on live sites as well. I'm sure our staff will as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Landsberg. Councillor Bunnag.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I rise to also speak in support of the officer's recommendation, and somewhat of a personal reflection. 24 years ago, I had the opportunity as a young soccer player to participate in the Olympic opening ceremony in Brisbane, which was one of the other feeder Olympic sites that was held for the 2000 Olympic Games. And the inspiration that I took as a young boy and soccer player at the time to actually participate in an Olympic Games in my backyard was really, really special. And I think about the opportunities that the Olympics coming to the Sunshine Coast in 2032 will present to other young people on the Sunshine Coast, but not just young people, people of all ages, is an exciting thing. So for you, Madam Mayor, to be able to travel to Paris and strengthen the relationships that we have within the Olympic family and secure the Olympic future for the Sunshine Coast and the legacy that that will bring to our region, I wholly support the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Bunnag. Councillor Suarez.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I also rise to support the officer's recommendation, and just wanted to add to the debate. I suppose Mr Switz could probably attest to this. It hasn't been a short journey to get to where we are today. It's been 9 years discussions with the IOC, the AOC, state government, local government, our community through the legacy group that we created. This Games will not only present sporting infrastructure and other infrastructure that we need, not only memories such as the one that Councillor Bunnag has just related, but broader than that, our arts, our connectivity, our accessibility, our economic benefits. It will bring so much more to this region, and we have fought long and hard over those long 9 years to get to this point today. We have a new mayor. The baton has been handed over, and it's vital that Mayor Natoli create those relationships with all of those stakeholders to make sure that we retain what we have, that we get the best outcome for our region, and creating those relationships is vital. And I think that going to Paris, getting those learnings of what worked, what didn't work, and being able to have those forward discussions is vital. So I'm very much looking forward to the outcome once you get back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you. I also rise just to fully support the officer recommendation, but also just to note that the role of Mayor for this region is to represent and to strongly advocate for the well-being and the future direction of this region. This is an exceptional opportunity, really, to continue to put the Sunshine Coast on the global map, well ahead of the 2032 Olympic Games and Paralympic Games. I think the opportunity is too rich to pass up, and I do fully support it. And I would love the thought that at some point there is a young fella, young lady who plays soccer who must have looked as good as Councillor Bunnag did in 2000, running around here. And I know that there's many young people here on the Sunshine Coast that are they're already preparing, and they are really ready to represent Australia and the Sunshine Coast region at the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games, and I think it would be exceptional to be able to champion their hopes and aspirations through this trip. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Burns. Councillors, I'd like to speak to this motion. The Olympic and Paralympic Games will put the Sunshine Coast on the map, showcasing our beautiful region to the world as we host basketball, football, the marathon and race walk, road cycling, kiteboard and mountain biking. Even more importantly, the Games will also deliver state and federal government investment in much needed facilities and opportunities for the sports and, importantly too, arts and culture. The legacy infrastructure is what's important to me. This is what our region has been missing out on, and we need to make absolutely sure that we don't miss out again. I'm determined for that to happen. Attending the Paris Olympics will demonstrate the Sunshine Coast's commitment to these Games and holding events in our region in 2032. Not going sends a message of a different kind, and I believe this could absolutely jeopardise our ability to attract investment and infrastructure. Everyone is telling me I need to go. I have consulted broadly, and I accept that it is the role of Mayor to attend and to represent our community in Paris. That said, I understand that currently our community is feeling the impacts of the cost of living crisis. And for me, the idea of voting myself an overseas trip in my first ordinary meeting simply doesn't meet the pub test. The idea of it has made me feel sick, and I have to listen to my gut. I stand for strong representation of the people, and I need to be true to that. I accept that in order to represent the Sunshine Coast strongly in the future, I may need to travel overseas again, and as a council, we will judge each case individually. But this time, just 3 weeks to the day after being sworn in, as I ask for your support to travel to Paris for the Olympics to represent our region, I also ask and add that I will pay for my own flights personally, and I ask for your support. Are there any other speakers or questions? Councillor Johnson, would you like to close?
You to the CEO, based on those final comments that Madam Mayor made, do we need to amend C of the officer's recommendation to reflect her decision to pay for her own airfares?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the question, Councillor Natoli. I understand that the report is open to that and really doesn't, what the council is recommending is that we're approving the overseas travel, so I don't believe there's any changes that are required to the report to support Madam Mayor's statement. Thank you.
Councillor Landsberg. Councillor Landsberg.
Just a question, maybe directed to our CEO. Just on our previous agenda item 8.4 in councillor expenses and resources, a trip like this falls under, obviously, in regards to professional development. Would the Mayor be in the position to actually claim for those expenses if she wished to on the return?
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for your question, Councillor Landsberg. It would be regular practice for council to undertake any bookings or expenditure in this respect for any of council's improved travel requirements. So ordinarily we wouldn't encourage someone booking and then paying for something themselves after the fact. That can happen sometimes. But in the way that the report is structured, theoretically there could be a claim after the travel was there, should that eventuate.
And I'm sure it's just a theoretical question, and I was the only, in regards to the previous term, just to let our public know, I was the only councillor that supported our former Deputy Mayor in overseas travel that wanted to travel business class, and it was a huge trip. It was, a long trip for a councillor that's getting on in years to take, where you've got to land in a European country and ready to go for 5 days. And I know I'm not referring to you as that age, Madam Mayor. I'm talking about a Deputy Mayor, and
thank you for
our
that
new Deputy Mayor is quite young as well. But I think this is an ongoing discussion where our policy has to really reflect on the importance of travelling overseas and the importance of our mayor that will need privacy in regards to reading a lot of sensitive material that will be obviously on that trip with her. And I just would like our council to reflect on that in maybe future trips, and especially international and overseas travel. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Landsberg. Councillor Dixon.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just for the record, I really appreciate the comments that you've made this morning. And in fact, we've had these conversations, you and I. I'm very impressed to see a new mayor have the attitude that it doesn't sit right with you and that you felt compelled to pay for your own flights. But you're my representative, and I actually want to honour you, and I would support the council paying for your flights. I believe that's the most appropriate thing, because over many years you will probably be undertaking business for council to other parts of the world, and that's your job, and you're our mayor, you're our region's mayor, and we must honour you and respect you. So as much as you want to pay and you'll do what you want to do, I would very much support the council bearing the costs of the travel for you. But I'll just put that on record and, again, respect your point of view.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor, if I could, yes, maybe. Just through you, Madam Mayor, if the Mayor was to, if you were to all support the Mayor and the Mayor was to cohesively agree to that, you would need to make an amendment to the paper as it stands at the moment, because it doesn't actually include those costs of travel in the paper as it is. It's open to that, but you would need to be more specific in the recommendation, just for clarity. Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, to be very explicit, you would need to move an amendment to the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Johnston, would you like to close?
Yes. We have here a demonstration by our Mayor that she is a person who respects the ratepayers' money, and also that she's a determined individual, because she did mention that to us, and we had said to her that we didn't think it was appropriate for you to pay for your own way. However, that's your wish. So although we are passing a resolution that expenses up to that amount can be claimed, if you don't claim it, well then you don't claim it. But we'd like to thank you very much for this magnanimous offer. And I'd also like to make it very clear to everybody that the other costs, whilst Madam Mayor is overseas, attending all those functions, accommodation, etc., is not a council expense. is being borne by external body. And also I'd like to make it very clear that Councillor Joe Natali is not going either. So thank you very much, and I encourage all councillors to vote in favour.
Thank you, Councillor Johnston. Okay, councillors, can we put that to the vote? All those in favour? That has been carried unanimously. Councillors, as there are no notices of motion, we will move now to item 10, petitions. Councillor Landsberg, I understand you have a petition.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I have a petition from a Mr Damien Heed of Golden Beach. And this is a petition that actually it refers to the concerns of water quality in the northern section of the Pumicestone Passage. We've known, obviously, since the breakthrough of Bribie Island that that section along Bullcock Beach is actually not receiving proper tidal flows in and out of that water body. We know several of our stormwater outlets are positioned there as well, and there is concern for the water quality. I may add that Department of Environment Science have installed a water monitoring device in that waterway. I'm just speaking. Anyway, I've only got 1 minute. I know, Megan.
No, you're just moving it at the moment.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dixon. Councillor Landsberg has moved the petition be received and referred to the CEO. It has been seconded by Councillor Dixon. Thank you. Councillor Landsberg, would you like to speak?
My apologies. I've only
Now here's your 1 minute. Do we start that 1 minute again now?
35
Yes.
seconds. No,
okay.
it's okay. 35 seconds. Mr Damien Heed has been constantly involved in raising communities' concerns around the waterway. We have 505 signatures, 374 online and 131 signed signatures, and I'd like to present this to our CEO. Thank you.
Okay. I will now put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? It's been carried unanimously. Councillors, as we have no confidential items for this agenda, Councillor Johnston?
Madam Mayor, I'd just like to assure you that while you're overseas in Paris, that we won't change things too much on council. So.
Thank you, Councillor Johnston. I'll make it a condition of accepting the addition to go. Thank you. Okay. As we have no confidential items for the agenda, I will declare the meeting closed at 11:36. Thank you, councillors.